In this chapter, we cover basic understanding of supply chain, and some of the things that we are going to cover include what is the goal of supply chain, like what is the basic purpose, and how does the supply chain impact success, or we may even say failure of a firm. We'll also look at three key supply chain decision phases. There are two views. One is cycle and other is pull-push view of a supply chain. So we'll have a look at that, and we'll also go through supply chain macro processes within a firm. Supply chain consists of various parties involved, which may be directly involved or indirectly involved in fulfilling a customer request. And broadly, this could involve what is given in the small flow chart above: suppliers, manufacturers, distributor, retailer, and customer. And supply chain also involves flow of information, products, and funds among various stages of the supply chain. Now, if you look at within each of these stages, for example, within the supplier or manufacturer, you'll also find there are various interconnected processes happening within that, and flow of information, products, and funds also go on in those processes. So if you take example of Best Buy, and let's say a customer is interested in buying a TV. So these TVs may be from various manufacturers like Samsung, you may have Sony, and so on, which are distributed through their distributors. And again, these companies like Samsung or Sony may have their own suppliers. Although in the picture above you see that we have supplier, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, and customer in just one line, but in reality they are more of a network. One thing to point out is that each of these above stages need not be in the supply chain. For example, if you take Dell and look at their server business, those servers are basically built to order, and they only involve supplier, manufacturer, and customer. So we do not have distributor and retailer in that supply chain. But one thing is also true, that a customer is always part of the supply chain, and all the action basically starts from a customer order. The key objective of every supply chain is to maximize the overall value generated by the supply chain. And this value, which can also be called as supply chain surplus, is basically difference between customer value and supply chain cost. So let's take an example again from Best Buy, and let's say a customer is interested in buying a Sony TV, which is like Ultra HD and 4K, and it costs about $1,400. So a customer will pay $1,400 only when they value that product to be either $1,400 or more. Now this customer value depends on various things. So buying 65-inch Sony TV, which is quite big, and it's difficult to put it in a car. If a customer does not have a truck, it is going to be difficult transporting it from Best Buy to house. So how much value a customer is ready to attach to a product or service depends on like various factors. For example, it can depend on how much a customer has to travel to reach Best Buy. It also depends on whether the retailer is providing free delivery or not. It also depends on product functionality, what features that product has. One thing to remember is that there is only one source of revenue in the supply chain, and that is the customer. The customer value provides the revenue side of the equation. But to deliver or provide that product or service to the customer, supply chain incurs various types of costs. So it involves like transportation of that product from maybe manufacturer to the warehouse to the retailer and so on, or even to the customer, making that product available in the store so that a customer does not face stock out situations. All that incurs a lot of cost. So that is clubbed under supply chain cost. The objective of any supply chain is to maximize the supply chain surplus and this is done across the supply chain and not like at individual stages. Another thing to note is that supply chain cost may also be impacted by supply chain structure. So if you compare like two different countries, for example, United States versus a country like India, they have totally different supply chain structure when it comes to retailing. In US, retailing is very consolidated. As compared to that, in India, there are so many small retail outlets. So this has a big impact on supply chain cost. Success or failure of any supply chain is dependent on how it has been designed and how well flow of products, information and funds are managed. So let's look at a simulation about the growth of Walmart stores in US. So starting in year 1962, you can see that slowly they opened many new stores. So Walmart has been a leader in using supply chain design, planning and operation very effectively. So they designed their supply chain with clusters of stores around the distribution centers. So obviously this helped them with lowering the cost of supply chain in a big way. And Walmart also is regarded as a leader in sharing information collaboratively with the suppliers to bring down the cost. So as a result, from 1980 to 23, they have seen a very strong growth. They had sales of $1 billion in 1980, and by 2013, that number grew to $469 billion. Another example of supply chain success is 7-Eleven Japan. They developed a very responsive replenishment system with great information system to ensure products are available when and where they are needed. In 1974, they had a sale of about 1 billion yen, and that has grown to 1.9 trillion yen in 2013. One example of a company that failed to have an effective supply chain is Webvan. This company was basically an online business. In fact, they had their IPO in 1999, and within 2 years, which is 2001, they folded. So they designed large warehouses in US, and they delivered groceries directly to the customer homes. But this ended up increasing the supply chain cost drastically because of transportation and labor, and they ended up folding within 2 years. Sometimes some businesses may start very well with the well-designed supply chain, but the problem could be in adapting to changing situations. So for example, Borders had a sale of $4 billion in 2004, and it reduced to only 2.8 billion by 2009. So within 5 years, they saw a drastic fall, basically because they were not able to adapt to changing supply chain. And it also coincided with growth of Amazon, which were very, very successful. Dell is another example. Dell had $56 billion sale in 2006. So clearly they were very, very successful when it came to supply chain design, planning and operation. But they had to adapt their supply chain due to shifts in technology and customer expectations. Now we need to wait and watch how successful their new supply chain strategy is going to be. So one key point about supply chain design, planning and operation decisions is that to stay competitive, supply chains must adapt to changing technology and customer expectations. Something which is very successful may not remain as successful if we do not look at the changing conditions and help to adapt supply chain to suit those changing conditions. There are broadly 3 decision phases in a supply chain, which are supply chain design, planning, and operations. So if you look at the triangle, you may notice that the area for operation decisions are higher compared to planning. These are like day-to-day decisions that one need to make related to the supply chain, and number of these decisions obviously are much larger than what you would see with supply chain planning and design. But implications of these decisions are opposite. For example, changes in the design of a supply chain, so those decisions could have impact that will be seen for several years, whereas decisions involving supply chain planning may have impact that may be from a quarter to a year. And similarly, decisions involving supply chain operations may have impact for several weeks. So if you look at the first one, here companies or businesses look at how the supply chain should be configured and how resources will be allocated and what processes each stage will perform. Some examples of typical decisions at this phase are whether to outsource supply chain functions or whether to do it in-house. Decisions involving location and capacities of the facility. So obviously it will depend on how much demand may exist for this product. For example, if you look at an automotive company like Ford Motor Company, so they have so many different parts, and some of them may be built in-house, others may come from suppliers. Another example is products to be made or stored at various locations. What will be mode of transportation? So whether it will be shipped, it will be sent by trucks or maybe train. What information system will be made use of? If you look at a supply chain which involves so many different partners, it is very, very important that information flows from one partner to other partner smoothly. And information systems play a very important role there. For example, let's say there is a small change in the design of a product, and that information has to be shared by several of the suppliers. So more delay in sharing that information, more cost the supply chain is going to incur, because some of the suppliers may already be making products with older design, and then they may have to scrap all those items that were produced with the old design. So please note that planning has to work within the guidelines set by the design phase. So supply configuration basically is fixed from the strategic phase, and goal here is to maximize supply chain surplus given the constraints established earlier in the design phase. Usually planning phase starts with forecast of a demand in the coming year, and some of the typical examples of decision at this stage involve which markets will be served and from which locations, how the buildup of inventories are planned, whether a process will be subcontracted or whether it will be done in-house, what will be inventory policies, how many inventory items to keep, because if the inventory levels are too low, that may increase the chances of stock out, but if the inventory levels are too high, that will increase unnecessary cost of managing that inventory. Also, some decisions regarding timing or size of the market promotions. So in this phase, a decision maker has to consider or take into account demand uncertainty. There could be changes in the exchange rates, and there may be competitors who may have some impact, and a company may have to change their plan. Now, decisions at the operation level obviously work within the guidelines set by planning stage, and these decisions involve individual customer orders. So note that configuration is already fixed and planning policies are already defined in the previous phases. So goal here is to handle incoming customer orders as effectively as possible. So effectively here obviously means at low cost. So some examples include allocation of orders to inventory or production. So how many items should be produced or how many items should be kept in inventory. Then also what will be order due dates, decisions involving generation of pick lists at the warehouse. They allocate an order to a particular shipment, also set delivery schedules, place replenishment orders. So all these decisions are examples that happen at this stage. One thing you may notice is because the time horizon is short, it is like a few weeks, we have much less uncertainty compared to the strategic and planning phase. Overall, we can certainly say that supply chain design, planning, and operation have a really significant role to play in the success of a supply chain. And some good examples are Amazon, Walmart, and Apple. They are so successful because they have in place very effective supply chain design, planning, and operation. So far as we have seen, supply chain is essentially a sequence of various processes and stages and flow of product information and funds among them. We can also look at a supply chain from two different process views. One is called cycle view and second one is called push-pull view. So between customer and retailer phase, we have customer order cycle. Between distributor and retailer, we have replenishment cycle, and so on. So each cycles occur between two successive stages of the supply chain. And also note that not every supply chain will have all the cycles that we see here. So as an example, Dell bypasses distributor and retailer and sends servers directly from manufacturing to customers. Now each cycle is likely to have 6 sub-processes within them, which are listed below, which starts with the supplier stage markets product, and then the buyer stage places an order. So if you take example of Amazon, when a customer places an order, they are part of customer order cycle, and here the customer is the buyer and Amazon is the supplier. Whereas when Amazon orders books from the distributor to replenish inventory, then we are looking at replenishment cycle where Amazon is the buyer and the distributor becomes the supplier. So in each cycle, the aim of buyer is to make sure that there is product availability and also achieve economies of scale when ordering. At the same time, supplier tries to forecast consumer order and reduce the cost of receiving that order. And both the players try to minimize the supply chain cost. So although you'll find that these 6 sub-processes that we have listed here are part of every cycle, you'll also notice that there may be some differences. If you look at a customer order cycle, please note that the demand is mostly independent and also it is external to the supply chain and it is very uncertain. Whereas in other cycles, things might be slightly different. For example, if you look at procurement cycle, and let's take example of Ford Motor Company, and let's say they plan to manufacture 100,000 cars next year. So a supplier of tire once knows that Ford is planning to make 100,000 cars. They can easily calculate that every car needs 4 tires. So 100,000 times 4 is 400,000. So this supplier will have to make 400,000 tires. So in this way, supplier can very easily determine what the demand is going to be. Another difference that you may see from one cycle to other cycle is the size of the order. So if you look at customer, the customer may be interested in buying one car, but retailer who handle these cars, when they order from the distributor, that number will be much higher compared to one. Similarly, a manufacturer may order even a bigger quantity when they are buying tires from a supplier. So as we move from customer to the supplier, you will notice that the number of individual orders will reduce, whereas size of each order is going to increase. So all these essentially means that sharing information is very critical, and especially as we move from customer to retailer to distributor to manufacturer and to supplier, this sharing of information becomes more and more important. So a key point to remember here is that a cycle view of a supply chain clearly defines the processes involved in the supply chain and also who are the owners of each process. So in each cycle, we know very specifically who is the supplier and who is the buyer. And this becomes really important at the time of making operational decisions. The second view of supply chains is the push-pull view. Pull is where execution is initiated in response to a customer order. So this is a sort of reactive, like when a customer places an order, then a particular cycle gets activated. On the other hand, push is where execution is initiated in anticipation of customer orders. So this is more of a speculative, where we are using demand forecast from the customer to understand how many products will be needed. So this is depicted below. Let's take an example of a company named LL Bean. So this is a make to stock kind of business. So what happens here is as soon as a customer places an order, the processes within the customer order cycle initiate. And because all the processes in the customer order cycle get started because of the customer placing an order, they are called pull processes. And then if you look at the replenishment cycle or manufacturing cycle or procurement cycle, they operate in the anticipation of demand in the customer order cycle. So because of this, they are part of the push processes. So these cycles will be to the left of push-pull boundary, whereas customer order cycle will be on the right side of push-pull boundary. But if you take another example of Ethan Allen supply chain, so this company makes customized furniture. So Ethan Allen basically builds to order, and a customer who may be interested in, let's say, a sofa or a chair and may select a particular fabric or finish. So once that order is placed, all the processes within not only customer order cycle but also manufacturing cycle gets activated. So in this case, both customer order cycle and manufacturing cycle become part of pull processes. So these two cycles will be to the right of push-pull boundary. On the other hand, procurement cycle still has to anticipate how much will be needed by manufacturing, and therefore procurement cycle becomes part of push processes, and it will be placed to the left of push-pull boundary. Note that component orders from the suppliers need not wait for the customer orders because generally they take more time. So they have to be done in anticipation of demand from manufacturing and ultimately customers. And because they have to be done in anticipation and some kind of forecasts are used, procurement cycle becomes part of push processes and will be placed to the left of push-pull boundary. So far we have discussed many processes in a supply chain, but they can be broadly classified into three categories. First one is customer relationship management, which is also popular as CRM, and these processes are all those processes which lie at the interface between firm and its customers. Whereas internal supply chain management, as the name indicates, are all the processes that are within or internal to the firm. For example, a company may be involved in manufacturing, the production lines or assembly lines that they have, and how they are managed, how inventories are managed within those processes is obviously internal to the firm. And then the third category is supplier relationship management, SRM, which covers all the processes at the interface between firm and its suppliers. So it includes activities such as how a supplier is chosen and monitoring how a supplier is performing in terms of on-time deliveries, quality, and so on. So these three macro processes, SRM, ISCM, and CRM, they manage the flow of products, information, and funds. And also they are required to ensure that customer orders are generated and finally fulfilled. If you look at CRM, which is closer to the customer, the processes involved at that stage are things like marketing, pricing of the products, sales, call center, how the order will be managed, and so on. So, if you take an example of a company like Apple, so from CRM side, things that Apple might be involved in is having a good website where a customer can come and look at what are the products or services or softwares that the company has to offer, what are the details, specifications, price, and other things that they may be interested in. Also, if customers have some complaints or problems with their products or services, then how they can contact the company to get the problem resolved. Internal supply chain management could involve things like strategic planning, demand planning, supply planning, fulfillment, and field service. So, a company like Apple obviously has to plan how to fulfill the demand. They have to develop strategic plans not only regarding fulfilling the current demand but also future demand. They have to look into their production related activities. They have to monitor fulfillment of actual orders. And also they have to figure out, like, if an iPhone is made in, let's say, China, then how to fulfill the demand world over. So there's a demand obviously within China and places closer to China like Japan, India, and so on, and then demand in Europe, America. So where to keep the warehouses, how the product information and funds will flow. So all those things need to be managed. So all that becomes part of internal supply chain management processes. Supplier relationship management could involve sourcing a supplier. A supplier may be potentially maybe in China, it may be in Thailand, or maybe in Japan. So all the processes involved in locating a good supplier is part of SRM, and then negotiating the prices or various aspects related to the supply. So negotiation of supply terms, what are the terms and conditions that will be used. Not only that, it also includes evaluation and selection of suppliers. And within SRM, we also have things like design collaboration. So as you know, for Apple, most of the design activities happen in US and manufacturing may be outside. But whenever there is a design change, obviously that has to be communicated to manufacturing. So there has to be close interaction with manufacturing and design activity. There has to be also supply collaboration, and that is also done by supplier relationship management processes. One thing to note is that all these supply chain macro processes are ultimately serving the same customer. So although they are listed in different categories, ultimately they are serving the same customer. And it goes without saying that to have a successful supply chain management, all these three macro processes of the supply chain need to be closely integrated. So in many companies, you may see that CRM is mostly managed by marketing people, ISCM is mainly handled by manufacturing, and SRM is mostly handled by purchasing department. Because these are like three different departments, sometimes communication gaps can occur, and that can create a lot of difficulties for efficiently running the supply chain. Ultimately, the aim is to match supply and demand, and when communication and information sharing is difficult, it can lead to dissatisfied customers and also high cost. So good communication and coordination among owners of these processes that interact with each other is very, very important. So now let's look at some supply chains, and the idea is to raise some questions that must be answered during their design, planning and operation phases. So let's start with this example of Gateway and Apple. So Gateway was founded in 1985 and they were involved in direct PC sales after manufacturing, and they did not have any retail presence. In late 1990s, they opened retail stores, but they did not carry any finished good inventory. So they had slightly different strategy compared to many other companies. So what these stores would do, so they will help customers to select right configuration for their computers. So people working at those stores, they were obviously more knowledgeable about technology and other aspects, and they would help the customer in selecting what will be the right configuration based on what needs they have. So there could be a customer who has some very basic needs in using a computer, maybe typing, mostly using a word processor and so on. As compared to that, some other customer may have a need to have a computer that can help with the video editing, and these store people will help a customer to go for the right configuration based on what their requirements are. And once it is known, then the PCs will be manufactured with those specific configuration based on the order, and then they will be shipped directly from assembly plants. So this model was very successful at that time, and in fact in late 1990s their stock price was like almost $80 per share. But as it happens with most businesses, what is working at one point in time, there's no guarantee that it will continue to work forever, because technologies change and new competitors come into the market and so on. So same thing happened with Gateway, and by 2002 their market price or stock price was about $4 per share. Now if you look at Apple, they had a different approach. So their first store came up in 2001, and these stores carried product inventory. So if you look at Apple, it's a very unique company. It has the maximum market cap, but if you look at their products, they can be fitted very easily on a single normal table. So their stores carried product inventory, and because they have this unique product design and also low variety, they have seen a lot of success. By 2013, they had 415 stores, and just from these stores, they had $20 billion sales. So naturally, looking at Gateway and Apple, some questions related to supply chain come in our mind. And one question is, why did Gateway choose not to carry any finished product inventory in its retail stores? Whereas, why did Apple choose to carry inventory at its stores? Another question that comes to mind is, should a firm with an investment in retail stores carry any finished good inventory? What are the characteristics of products that are most suitable to be carried in finished good inventory? What characterizes products that are best manufactured to order? Another question related to supply chain is, how does product variety affect the level of inventory a retail store must carry? And then, is a direct selling supply chain without retail stores always less expensive than a supply chain with retail stores? What factors explain the success of Apple retail and failure of Gateway country stores? So in later chapters, obviously, we'll discuss some concepts and also we'll discuss some methodologies that may be helpful in answering these kind of supply chain related questions. So Zara is basically a fashion store chain owned by Inditex, which is Spain's largest apparel manufacturer and retailer. So in 2012, Inditex had 16 billion euros sales from 6,000 retail stores in 86 different countries. So in this business, usually cycle time from design to sales is about 6 months. But Zara has managed it within 4 to 6 weeks, which is a big achievement. And because of this lower cycle time, they are able to introduce new design changes every week. And also they are able to change 75% of their merchandise, which is displayed every 3 to 4 weeks. And that's what customers love about Zara. So if you compare Zara to its competitors, their competitors mostly get the manufacturing done from Asian countries, whereas Zara's approach is slightly different. So they have identified some low cost sources in Asia. To achieve flexibility and quick sources, they also get things done in Portugal and Spain. And 40% of the manufacturing is owned by Inditex, whereas remaining 60% is outsourced. Products where there is high uncertainty in demand are handled mostly in Europe. So products which are more predictable, they are handled out of Asian locations. So Zara has invested very heavily in technology and they maintain a very responsive supply chain. So in 2012, Inditex had about 8 distribution centers located in Spain. Within European stores, they have average delivery time of about 24 to 36 hours and about a maximum of 48 hours for stores in America or Asia. This obviously helps to match demand and supply very effectively. So some of the questions that may come up related to supply chain are listed here, like what advantage does Zara gain against the competition by having a very responsive supply chain? Another question is why has Inditex chosen to have both in-house manufacturing and outsourced manufacturing? Why not just depend on in-house or totally do it outside? Also, why has Inditex maintained manufacturing capacity in Europe even though manufacturing in Asia is much cheaper and their competitors are actually doing that? Why does Zara source products with uncertain demand from local manufacturers and products with predictable demand from Asian manufacturers? So what is the thought behind that? What are the supply chain concepts that help in making those kind of decisions? What advantage does Zara gain from replenishing its stores multiple times a week compared to a less frequent schedule? Remember, Zara is in fashion business and things change very quickly. How does the frequency of replenishment affect the design of its distribution system? Do you think Zara's responsive replenishment infrastructure is better suited for online sales or retail sales? So very interesting questions. So we looked at the basic understanding of what a supply chain is, what is the objective of supply chain, and we also looked at 3 key supply chain decision phases: design, planning, and operations. And then we also looked at 2 supply chain views. One was cycle and other was push-pull view. We also looked at 3 macro processes that a firm has related to supply chain. And in next few topics, we'll dive deeper into the concepts and methodologies.